Welcome to another episode of PPL Pod. I want you to imagine a scenario for a moment. Like, really picture this. Imagine sitting down to create an album of euphoric, wildly upbeat 1990s style dance pop.
Right, the kind of music that practically demands you get up and move.
Yeah.
The kind that, vibrates in your chest at a crowded club.
Exactly. But there's a catch. You have to write and record this entire project while completely paralyzed by depression, PTSD, and severe chronic physical pain.
I mean, that sounds impossible. Like trying to paint a bright, sunny landscape while you're physically trapped inside a pitch-black room.
It really does. It is this massive contradiction. You have the total absence of joy colliding head-on with a genre that is, well, entirely defined by joy.
And yet, that deeply fractured environment is exactly what birthed today's subject.
Yeah. Today, we are bringing you a deep dive into Chromatica, the 2020 hit concept album by Lady Gaga. And whether you are a diehard fan who bought all the merchandise or just someone who casually heard these songs echoing out of car windows, this story matters.
It really does, because this album wasn't just a simple, calculated return to her dance pop roots. It was a deeply personal exercise in what critics called therapy pop.
Right, and completely by accident, it ended up becoming a global soundtrack for a world trapped in pandemic lockdowns.
So our mission today is to explore how an artist took her darkest, most difficult moments fueled by the crushing pressures of fame and deep personal trauma, and somehow engineered them into this vibrant, neon pink cyberpunk world of healing.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand the bright neon lights of Chromatica, we first have to understand the darkness that preceded it. We really can't just start in 2020.
No, definitely not. You have to look at the timeline leading up to it.
Right, so following the somewhat mixed reaction to her 2013 album Art Pop, Gaga spent years essentially rebranding herself. She was trying to prove her vocal and musical authenticity to a world that still saw her as, a pop provocateur in a meat dress.
Which was a massive shift. I mean, she recorded a traditional jazz album with Tony Bennett.
Yeah, and she stripped away all the wild costumes and the heavy synthesizers for Joanne in 2016. That record was full of acoustic guitars, country, and soft rock sounds.
And then, of course, she reached an entirely new audience with the massive Oscar-winning success of A Star is Born.
Exactly. So from the outside looking in, that pivot looked incredibly successful. Joanne became her fourth consecutive #1 album in the United States.
Yeah, spawning the multi-platinum hit Million Reasons, but the media was still constantly questioning the authenticity of her output.
Like, was the stripped-down singer-songwriter the real Gaga, or was it just another costume?
Right, and more importantly, internally, the sources paint a very stark picture of her mental state during this time. She admitted to being in a very dark place.
Which is so heartbreaking.
It really is. She felt profoundly threatened by the pace of her own life and the isolation her career had brought her. She actually described spending time in a sort of catatonic state, sitting on her porch for hours, completely unable to function.
It's like an actor who wins an Oscar for a gritty, serious drama. But the psychological toll of staying in that dark headspace is so heavy that the only way to survive is to run back to making colorful superhero blockbusters.
It's a great way to put it.
But in this case, they decide to bring all that heavy emotional baggage onto the green screen with them.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, her pursuit of authentic, stripped-down acoustic music on Joanne was fundamentally about trauma.
Right, because that album was heavily inspired by the death of her aunt.
Exactly. But putting out that record completely failed to bring her or her family any real emotional catharsis regarding that loss. It didn't fix the depression, it didn't heal the wound.
Wow, so it just lingered.
Yeah. Therefore, returning to the computer-generated synthetic sounds of electronic dance music wasn't a regression. It wasn't a step backwards into familiar commercial territory. It was a necessary survival tactic.
She needed the visceral, physical release that only a pounding dance beat could provide. I am struggling to wrap my head around this, though. If she is in a literal catatonic state, dealing with severe depression, and on top of that, dealing with the chronic, debilitating physical pain of fibromyalgia, how and by is stepping into a vocal booth to belt out 120 beat per minute dance anthems therapeutic?
I mean, it sounds like physical and psychological torture.
It really does. She was dealing with fibromyalgia while trying to make a literal dance record. How did they balance the physical pain with the upbeat production?
Well, that tension was the defining hurdle of the entire recording process. She actually faulted some of the extreme difficulties of recording on her fibromyalgia because her body was constantly fighting her.
So what was the mechanism that pulled her through?
It came down to a very specific creative partnership. The turning point happens in her home studio with her co-executive producer, BloodPop.
Okay.
They were kind of adrift until they sat down and listened to a rough demo of a song called Stupid Love. And that demo just broke the ice.
Oh, wow. So he really anchored the project.
Yeah. BloodPop wasn't just pressing buttons on a mixing board. He was actively pulling her out of that catatonic state on the porch. He helped her experiment on the piano, match these nascent, ugly sounds to her dark moods, and he built a safe psychological space where that pain could be processed.
That level of trust is incredible.
Gaga actually admitted she was compelled to finish the album solely thanks to that friendship.
The setting for this is pretty wild, too. They recorded the bulk of this in Gaga's home studio in the Hollywood Hills, which, by the way, used to belong to the legendary rocker Frank Zappa.
Such a cool detail.
Yeah, and they also worked out of Henson Recording Studios. But the most crucial decision they made wasn't where they recorded. It was the specific genre they chose to anchor the project.
Right, because in 2020, mainstream pop music was entirely dominated by slow, moody R&B and trap music crossovers.
But Gaga and BloodPop completely ignored the radio trends. Instead, they immersed themselves entirely in vintage, early 1990s house music.
Which was a massive risk at the time.
It was. But wait, for those of us who aren't club DJs, what exactly is it about 1990s house music that makes it the perfect vehicle for this kind of therapy?
Well, house music has a very specific cultural and psychological history. Originating in Chicago and New York in the 1980s and peaking globally in the 90s, house music was pioneered by Black, Latino, and queer communities.
Okay, so it has deep roots in marginalized spaces.
Exactly. It was inherently designed as a sanctuary. The driving four-on-the-floor beat, the soaring gospel-inspired vocals, the repetitive hypnotic synthesizers, these elements were literally crafted to help marginalized people dance through their societal and personal traumas together.
The dance floor was a church of release.
Yes. By choosing 90s house, Gaga and BloodPop were tapping directly into a genre mathematically engineered to convert pain into communal joy.
That makes so much sense. They are using the historical DNA of the genre to do the heavy lifting for her mental state. And to pull off that massive 90s soundscape, they brought in an absolute army of producers. We're talking about Scottish producer Burns, Swedish House Mafia's Axwell, Skrillex, Madeon, and Chami.
It was an incredibly intense, grueling process. It resulted in somewhere between 50 and 100 tracks.
Wow.
And Gaga has spoken about how she had to painfully relive her past traumas over and over again just to find the lyrics that would sit on top of these euphoric beats.
To elevate it beyond just a standard DJ set, they wanted the album to feel cinematic, right?
Yeah, they brought in musician Morgan Kibbe to compose 3 orchestral interludes, and they recorded these with a 26-person orchestra just days before the album was mastered.
Wait, really? How does a classical orchestra fit into a 90s cyberpunk house record? That sounds like a complete clash of styles.
Well, the clash is the point. The orchestra was meant to represent the epic battle between dark and light.
Oh, interesting.
When you listen to those interludes, you hear these swelling, dramatic, almost tense classical strings that abruptly give way to the cold, calculated, driving thump of a synthesizer. It musically demonstrates the messy human soul being stabilized by the machine of the dance floor.
So she builds this massive, aggressive, cinematic soundscape. But you can't just release a deeply traumatizing therapy session masked as club music without giving the audience a visual warning of what they're stepping into.
Right, which brings us to the world building and the visuals.
Originally, the working title for the album was Free Woman.
But she scrapped that title because she felt she didn't quite have the internal integrity or the emotional strength to claim it yet. She didn't feel entirely free.
Instead, she created Chromatica. She conceptualized it as a distant, fantastical planet where fighting warrior tribes unite to find peace and healing through dance.
And you see this world perfectly captured in the album's cover art, shot by veteran photographer Norbert Schooner.
Oh, it's so iconic. Gaga is styled as this cyberpunk-inspired warrior. She's got hot pink hair, these heavily embellished platform boots, welded metal claws, and a spiked bionic sleeve on her arm.
She's trapped underneath this massive metal sine wave, lying on a neon-lit metal grate. Journalists immediately compared the aesthetic to dystopian universes like Mad Max, Mortal Kombat, and the Alien franchise.
Here's where it gets really interesting. That sine wave isn't just a cool sci-fi prop they found in a prop house.
Not at all.
That sine wave is the actual mathematical symbol for sound. Gaga viewed music and sound as a form of mathematics, and for her, the sine wave physically resting on top of her represented how making this specific music was her literal heavy therapy.
It is the ultimate visual metaphor for the album's core duality. The sine wave is the cold, calculated math of a dance beat, and it is acting as a cage, or maybe a protective shield, masking a deeply human, chaotic pain underneath.
That visual duality perfectly maps onto the audio tracks themselves. Let's break down some of these specific songs because they operate like a Trojan horse.
What's fascinating here is how effectively it tricks you. Think about the first time you heard these tracks on the radio. You were probably tapping your foot, maybe feeling this rush of euphoria, completely unaware of what the artist was actually saying.
Totally. Take the song 9/11. It's built on this sleek, robo-funk groove with heavily vocoded, processed vocals that sound very reminiscent of Daft Punk.
Right.
But the lyrics are a raw, unfiltered confession about her self-loathing and her reliance on antipsychotic medication.
The vocal production there is a perfect example of explaining the how. A vocoder is an effect that synthesizes the human voice, stripping away the natural, breathy imperfections and replacing them with a robotic, synthesized pitch.
So by heavily vocoding her voice on 9/11, she is sonically demonstrating the emotional numbness and the robotic feeling of being heavily medicated on antipsychotics.
Exactly. It's brilliant production.
Then you have Rain on Me, her massive collaboration with Ariana Grande. It's a French house-inspired anthem that feels incredibly uplifting.
It really does.
But again, for those not deep in electronic music lore, what makes a track French house?
Well, French house is characterized by a heavy reliance on vintage disco samples, aggressive use of audio filters that make the music sound like it's sweeping in and out of a tunnel, and a very steady thumping bass line. It's designed to feel sweeping and dramatic.
Okay. And Gaga explained that the lyrics of Rain on Me, paired with this dramatic sound, are actually symbolism for her dependence on alcohol.
Right. The rain is the alcohol pouring down. It's a song about finding resilience while actively drowning.
Wow. You also have Free Woman, a very keyboard-heavy track where she is actively reclaiming her freedom and her body after experiencing sexual assault from a music producer earlier in her career.
Even the collaborations carry an immense amount of historical weight. On Sine from Above, she works with Elton John.
It's the sweeping electronica and trance track that actually ends with a jarring drum bass outro. I remember listening to that the first time and being completely thrown off by that ending. What is drum and bass, and why end a soaring dance track with it?
Drum and bass is a genre defined by incredibly fast, frantic, and complex breakbeats, usually hovering around 160 to 180 beats per minute. It feels chaotic and urgent.
Oh, definitely.
Axwell and Elton John had actually produced the instrumental for this track 7 years prior.
Yeah.
And Gaga brought Elton John in not just because he's a pop legend, but because he was a longtime mentor to her and a primary driving force in her own journey to sobriety.
Oh, that makes so much sense. So his presence on a song about the healing power of a sign from above, meaning the healing power of sound itself, is deeply intentional.
Exactly. And ending it with that chaotic drum and bass outro represents the frantic, messy, nonlinear reality of trying to heal your mind. It doesn't end with a neat little bow. It ends with a frantic burst of energy.
We also can't forget Sour Candy, a deep house track featuring the K-pop group Blackpink, which is essentially a catchy, club-ready warning advising lovers to embrace their ugly, damaged imperfections.
The whole thing acts as this therapy pop experience, as journalist Corey Grove of Rolling Stone called it. Gaga went into this project wanting to make a record that forces the listener to rejoice, even in their absolute saddest moments.
You are lured in by a shiny 120 beat per minute synthesizer, and before you can process what is happening, you are on the dance floor confronting trauma.
Exactly.
So Gaga had this incredible healing dance party ready to unleash on the world in April of 2020. But as we all remember too well, the real world suddenly shut down.
Yeah, the COVID-19 pandemic forced Gaga to postpone the album's release indefinitely.
Instead of promoting her new music, she completely pivoted. She felt releasing a pop album in the first terrifying weeks of a global pandemic was inappropriate, so she worked with the World Health Organization and Global Citizen to organize the Together at Home televised benefit concert.
It was a massive, unprecedented shift in strategy. By the time Chromatica finally dropped on May 29, 2020, the traditional promotional rulebook had been completely thrown out the window.
All the meticulously planned live gigs, like headlining the Coachella Festival and performing at the iHeartRadio Music Awards, were completely scrapped.
Which led to some of the most bizarre, memorable quarantine promotional tie-ins we've ever seen. Because they couldn't tour, Her team got incredibly creative.
Oh, they definitely did. They released Chromatica-themed eyeshadow palettes through her House Labs makeup line.
And they did these hilarious mock Weather Channel updates on social media with Ariana Grande to promote Rain on Me, pretending to be meteorologists in a downpour.
I remember those. Gaga also hosted a massive Zoom party fundraiser called the Chromatica Fundraiser.
Plus, she partnered with Oreo to release limited edition pink, gold, and Oreos with album symbols embossed right onto the cookies.
She even did a high-fashion surreal campaign with Dom Perignon champagne featuring the song Free Woman.
It was wild.
But the irony here is just staggering to me. She meticulously crafted an album specifically about the physical, communal act of dancing together in a sweaty club to heal your trauma. And she had to release it at a time when literally no one in the world was legally allowed to step foot inside a club.
The context of the pandemic completely transformed the relationship between the album and the listener. An album designed for a packed, sweaty dance floor was suddenly being consumed by millions of people sitting in total isolation in their bedrooms, kitchens, and living rooms.
So how did that shut-down, isolated world actually react to a club record?
Commercially, it was an absolute smash. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 with 274,000 units in its first week.
That was her sixth consecutive #1 album, setting a historical record for the fastest 6 #1s by a female artist in just 9 years and 2 days.
Over in the UK, it broke vinyl sales records, becoming the fastest-selling vinyl record of the year at that time.
Wow.
And artistically, it was validated when Rain on Me won a Grammy, making history as the very first female collaboration to ever win Best Pop Duo Group Performance.
But we have to talk about the critical pushback, right? Because it wasn't universally loved.
No, there was a very clear division among reviewers. While the album was highly praised for its meticulous craftsmanship and the refreshingly direct, painful themes we've been discussing, the dense, glossy, vintage house production faced some serious backlash.
Like from who?
Critics from publications like the AV Club and The Guardian argued that the album was sometimes too polished, derivative, and muddled by the sheer number of producers involved.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though. If an artist hires 5 of the biggest EDM producers in the world to basically just recreate a sound that already existed in 1993, isn't that just playing it safe?
It's a fair question.
I can see why critics might feel she was eluding true musical risk-taking by just mining familiar, nostalgic 90s dance territory rather than pushing pop music into the future the way she did at the beginning of her career.
That is exactly the debate that surrounded the record. But the counter-argument is that the glossy, derivative nature of the 90s house sound wasn't a lack of imagination. It was a deliberate, protective shield.
Oh, interesting.
The familiarity of the genre was the point. When you're processing trauma as heavy as sexual assault, addiction, and chronic pain, you don't necessarily want avant-garde experimental noise. You want a structured, familiar, reliable beat to hold you up. The polish was the armor.
And it seems like history sided with the armor because even with those critiques, the legacy of Chromatica is firmly cemented.
Definitely.
Alongside Dua Lipa's Future Nostalgia, which also dropped in that strange early 2020 window, Chromatica is widely credited with bringing 90s house music roaring back into the mainstream pop scene.
It absolutely laid the groundwork. It primed audiences for the massive house-inspired albums that came later, like Drake's Honestly Nevermind and Beyoncé's Renaissance in 2022.
And speaking of 2022, that postponed Chromatica Ball Stadium tour finally saw the light of day. 2 years late, she took Planet Chromatica to stadiums around the world, grossing over $112 million.
Selling over 800,000 tickets.
Yeah, and eventually turning the spectacle into a highly praised HBO special. So what does this all mean? We've got an album born from debilitating physical pain and deep psychological trauma, dressed up in pink cyberpunk armor, and released to a world that was entirely locked inside their homes.
It brings us right back to that massive contradiction we started with. Gaga went into that Hollywood Hills studio in a catatonic state, desperately looking for an antidepressant.
Right.
What she built with BloodPop and that army of producers wasn't just a personal escape hatch. It was a neon-soaked, mathematically precise armor that allowed her to dance through her own pain.
And by a strange twist of historical fate, she provided that exact same armor to millions of isolated fans who are navigating their own fear and trauma during a terrifying global pandemic.
She proved that you don't have to erase or cure your pain to feel joy. You can synthesize the two on the dance floor. This raises an important question. Is pop music most powerful when it provides a mindless, glossy escape that allows us to briefly ignore our reality?
Or is it most powerful when it acts as a Trojan horse, forcing us to confront our deepest traumas over a pounding 120 beat per minute synthesizer?
That's something for you to mull over next time you find yourself on a dance floor.
Thanks for listening to PPL Pod. Keep tuning in for more stories worth knowing.